So today we have a new guest into our fold. We welcome the new SSP for Jhansi, Mr. Shivhare Meena. Sir belongs to 10 batch IPS and today he is much keen to attend this technical session that is being induced for the doctors here for the last 1 month. तो इस हफ्ते में यूरोलॉजी और न्यूरो साइकियाट्री के संबंध में जो टॉपिक्स का डिस्कशन है, as per your own word, we have scheduled this session on Saturday. I request everyone to join virtually if they are not able to present here. If they are not able to present here, and if the crowd pours in, we do have enough seating capacity to start over this lecture. So who is? So Dr. Kankane will take over the chair right now, and then I request everyone to be participative. And as I requested earlier, it should be a dialogue rather than being monologue. Thank you.
बस यूएसबी कनेक्ट नहीं हो रही है यूएसबी ये तो नेट नहीं आएगा नहीं नेट इस पे क्यों आएगा ब्रांड ठीक है नेट नहीं आएगा ना इस पे नेट तो अगर होगा तब आएगा ना फिर से ट्राई करूंगा हाँ चलो वैसे ये तुमने डाल दिया नहीं वो नहीं वैसे तुम रिमूव में ऐसे फिर रख लेना नेट थोड़ा नेट का रीरूटिंग कर सकते हो नेट का वो देख लो बस आपकी हेल्प चाहिए पड़ेगी नीड हेल्प उनकी मदद ले लो इससे फिर वो क्विक एक्सेस हो जाएगा नहीं इस पे नहीं होगा दिस इज ये है हो गया ये सब ये उस पे नहीं आ रहा है वो तो इनका प्रॉब्लम है ना ये देखिए वो तो I need pointer sir नहीं ठीक है sir can I so good evening everyone respected DM sir respected principal sir respected DSP sir all dignitaries in the hall, all my dear friends and colleagues. This is indeed a great pleasure, matter of pride and honor for me that I am here and speaking something about neuropsychiatric issue in COVID-19. First of all, I would like to congratulate our respected DM sir and all his team and all our doctor fraternity for having good and effective control on second wave of COVID-19. We could able to achieve this goal only because of vision, hard work, and commitment of our DM sir. But still, we should keep our fingers crossed that third wave is still on the door. It may come at any time. So we should all follow the COVID appropriate behavior. So COVID-19, which was first thought to be as respiratory system disease, is now known to involve all systems, and it is now multi-system disease. Now I'm discussing today about the neuropsychiatric issues associated with COVID-19. So it is in December 2019 when it was first emerged in Wuhan, Hubei province, China. It was first isolated. It was first detected as lower respiratory tract infection in patient having unexplained pneumonia. It was declared as pandemic by WHO in March 11, 2020. Till February 2021, it affected more than 10.3 million pupils and 1.5 lakh deaths in India. Second wave of COVID-19 shoot off in April 21, which was peaked in next 1 month and now it started settling. As of 23rd May 2021, it affected 26.7 million persons and claimed about 3 lakhs of deaths in India. So I'll start my topic with a case. This is a live case which we had in our COVID hospital. So he was 55-year-old male, known case of diabetes mellitus, RT-PCR positive, who was in home isolation for last 10 days. Suddenly developed acute onset fever, irritability, hallucinations, psychosis, drowsiness, along with one episode of seizures and breathlessness. He landed in emergency department of our COVID hospital, had vitals of pulse 100 per minute, blood pressure 160 by 80, respiratory rate 32 per minute, saturation was 72% on room air. He was drowsy, irritable, moving all 4 limbs. Reflexes were normal, plantar both extensor. Neck rigidity was mild. He had mild neck rigidity. So we made provisional diagnosis of COVID-19 with encephalopathy. As with other cases of encephalopathy, we made a provisional, this was a provisional diagnosis, we made a differential diagnosis. Number 1, encephalitis, as he presented with the acute onset drowsiness, behavioral disturbances, and one episode of seizures. Second differential was acute cerebrovascular accident. Other possible differentials were electrolyte imbalance, metabolic disturbances, hyponatremia, endocrine dysfunctions, sepsis, and toxic encephalopathy, and also demyelinating disease like ADAM. We got him investigated. We got TLC 18,600 with 90% polymorph, 6% lymphocyte. Liver function test was mildly elevated. Renal function test was normal. Blood sugar was raised as he was known diabetic. X-ray chest revealed bilateral ground glass opacities. CT chest score was 16 by 25. All inflammatory markers were raised, so he was in cytokine storm. MRI brain also revealed T2 hyperintensities in frontal and temporal areas. So we made the probable diagnosis of encephalitis. And since there was background of COVID, so we made the diagnosis of COVID-associated encephalitis. This patient was managed with broad spectrum antibiotics, steroids, anti-epileptics, anti-edema measures, and other supportive treatment, along with treatment for COVID as per protocol. This patient survived with residual deficits, mild cognitive impairment, as well as some pseudovalvular effects and long-term signs. But he ultimately survived. So one thinks how this coronavirus gain access inside the brain and how it affects brain. So this is a large enveloped positive stranded RNA virus of beta coronavirus family, predominantly affects the vertebrates. It primarily infects lower respiratory tract, but also involves the CNS, gut, liver, kidney, and all other body organs. Microbiology of this COVID coronavirus has already been discussed in first lecture, so I'll not go in that details. So this is the structure of COVID, this virus. It is having the envelope having spike protein and membrane protein, single stranded RNA with nucleocapsid protein. So this is a spike protein which attached to the angiotensin coenzyme receptor, and that causes pathogenesis or virulence. That is the core factor which is the infected for virus. So spike protein of virus surface antigen binds to the ACE receptor of mammalian host cell. So tissue concentration of ACE to determine viral cellular trophism in the human. So more is the concentration of ACE receptors, more will the virulence of the virus to the particular tissue. So ACE2 is expressed in airway epithelium, kidney cells, small intestines, lung parenchyma, vascular endothelium, and throughout the CNS. So how this, how COVID is infect us? There is a 3 phase: early infectious phase, pulmonary phase, and late inflammatory response phase. In early infectious phase, COVID proliferate in the respiratory mucosa, and that is the most infective phase in which the person is infect and transmit the disease to other persons. While in pulmonary phase, the virus proliferates and invades the lung. It damages lung, cause hypoxemia, and cause cardiovascular dysfunction. In inflammatory response phase, there is a cytokine storm prevails, and it involves a multiple body organ in this phase. CNS are also likely to be affected in inflammatory phase. So let's come to neurovirulence. ACE2 receptors is present in all areas of the brain, be it neuron, astrocyte, microglia, and oligodendrocyte. So all these cells get infected by coronavirus. Different brain areas are affected by COVID-19. We can see that. So can I have okay? So it can affect different areas of the brain like motor cortex, posterior cingulate, ventricles, limbic systems, olfactory bulbs, and also medulla. So symptoms of COVID-19 depends on which area of the brain is involved. If it involves medulla, like ventrolateral medulla nucleus structure solitarius, it causes respiratory depression. If it involves the limbic system, it presents with the behavioral disturbances and memory disturbances. If it involves cortex, it presents with the seizures as well as motor dysfunctions. So this is how coronavirus infects the brain tissue by attaching to ACE2 receptors. So this is a neurotrophism. How it gain inside the nervous system? It gain access to the nervous tissue through the transcribal route. The coronavirus proliferates inside the nasal mucosa. Then it infects the neurons in the nasal tissue. It gain access inside the brain through these nerves, peripheral nerve ending, as well as it also gain access to nervous tissue through transsynaptic route. COVID-19 also infects leukocyte. Leukocyte further releases the cytokines and other chemokines and other inflammatory markers, which disrupt the blood-brain barrier. So through this disruption of blood-brain barrier, it gain access inside the nervous tissue and it infects the brain. Or it directly infects the vascular endothelium and gain inside the nervous tissue. This is the mechanism by which COVID-19 infects the brain. Either it is a direct infection of the brain, number one, because of the immunological effect by microglial activation, maladaptive cytokine response, or autoimmunity towards the nervous tissue. Or it is secondary effects secondary to hypoxia, micro and macrovascular thrombosis, hypertension, and impaired cerebral blood flow. These all are neuropathological mechanism of infection of brain. So almost 37% of hospitalized patients with COVID-19 developed some altered sensorium. Impaired sensorium ranged from mild drowsiness to delirium and coma. It has multifactorial etiologies like direct infection, damage to parenchyma, toxic metabolic encephalopathy, coagulopathy and cytokine storm, seizures, and demyelinating illness of the brain like ADEM. When SARS-CoV-2 involves the medullary respiratory center, it causes the respiratory depression and patient may have respiratory failure. So these are the risk factor. Patient at risk for developing encephalopathy, advanced age, underlying dementia and cognitive impairment, multiple comorbidities, severe mental illness, poor functional status and malnutrition, multiple metabolic and endocrine derangements, as well as sepsis, toxic metabolic state, and cytokine storm. These all are risk factor for encephalopathy. So COVID-19 not only causes encephalopathy, but it causes the wide array of neurological dysfunction involving peripheral as well as central nervous system. I'll discuss a few of them in today's talk. So this is mechanism of neurological manifestations. So one of them is headache. Headache is the most common initial complaint in patients with COVID-19. Incidence is around 10 to 15%. Mental stress, anxiety, change in lifestyle is possible reason for new onset headache. Neuroinflammatory mechanism and release of cytokine is thought to be a possible reason for headache. It can be the manifestation of serious complications like meningitis, encephalitis, vasculitis, etc. There is one more type of headache, is PPE-induced headache, has already been described in healthcare workers. The healthcare workers who is wearing prolonged duration of PPE, they also develop headache. So another is stroke and vascular event. Almost 1 to 2% of patients develop cerebrovascular events. Infarct, hemorrhage, venous sinus thrombosis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, subdural hematoma, all is known in this COVID-19. coagulopathy, vascular endothelial dysfunction, and vasculitis is possible mechanism for vascular event. Risk factor for stroke are old age, severe COVID-19 disease, several cardiovascular risk factors, sorry, and higher level of inflammatory markers. So seizure is a rare manifestation of COVID-19. Seizures usually presents when patient develop encephalitis, but it increases the precipitation of predisposing epilepsy seizures in predisposed patient. It can precipitate the seizures in epileptic patients. Causes may be direct effect of COVID-19 on brain, toxic metabolic state, multiple drug interactions that all lead to precipitation of seizures. GBS or Guillain-Barré syndrome is a very important peripheral nervous system manifestation of COVID-19. Usual presentation is acute onset low motor and weakness of limbs, along with bulbar and respiratory involvement. Antigenic cross-reactivity and molecular mimicry is a possible mechanism of GBS. IVIG and plasmapheresis is possible mode of treatment in these patients. Miller-Fisher syndrome or ophthalmoplegia, ataxia, and areflexia syndrome is also been reported with COVID-19. Loss of smell and taste, cranial and peripheral neuropathies, myopathies, and rhabdomyolysis are other manifestations that related to peripheral nervous system. A note on psychiatric disorder associated with the COVID-19. In COVID-19, we get multitude of psychiatric manifestations like major depressive illness, suicidal tendency, bipolar disorders, psychosis, obsessive compulsive disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders. As this COVID-19 affect overall psychological well-being of the patients. So we get multitude of psychiatric manifestations also. The mechanism behind these neuropsychiatric manifestations are intrinsic as well as extrinsic factors. Intrinsic factors means factors inside the body like direct involvement of limbic system and other brain connections, increase in brain pro-inflammatory molecules, neuroglial reactivities, or altered neurochemical and remodeling of the neuronal network. Extrinsic factor, that environmental factor includes pandemic fear, uncertainty about the disease, social isolation, misinformation in the social media platforms, dwindling economy, fear and panic, all contribute to psychological alteration in these patients. So if we see that COVID-19 outbreak, lockdown, social distancing, quarantine, financial crisis, all lead to impact on psychological health of person. We see that anxiety, panic, loneliness, post-traumatic stress disorder is found in majority of these patients. Whether they are quarantined, they are children, they are healthcare worker, or they are these our old patients. So the few words about management of these patient who is having psychological illness. We see a lot of patient in our ICU who become aggressive during treatment. So one has to ensure a comfortable ambient light in synchronization with the diurnal cycle of the patients. Ensure pain-free spell of 6 to 8 hours for sleep of the patient. We can allow the patient to use audiovisual aid to connect with their caregivers as well as their attendants to have positive feedback and positive environment, providing all kind of possible aids like glasses, hearing aid, etc., to convey the feeling of self-sufficiency and self-control over the situation. So if they are not controlled by these non-pharmacological measures, we can give haloperidol, olanzapine, quetiapine, dexmedetomidine, valproic acid, etc. So few words about post-COVID syndrome. We are seeing that with this pandemic, we have a lot of patients who treated and discharged from the hospital, but they have persistent symptoms beyond 4 weeks of their illness. This is also known as long COVID syndrome. This is a pathologic entity which involves persistent physical, medical, cognitive sick leave following COVID-19. As we have more and more treated patients with at least some symptoms related with different organ system, so we are going to have large number of these patients, which may overwhelm our healthcare system. So possible mechanism of this post-COVID syndrome is overexpression of transforming growth factors, leading to protracted state of immunosuppression, fibrosis of multiple organs. So the pathophysiology behind this post-COVID syndrome is that during infective phase, patient have cytokine storm. They have immune activation to counteract the effect of virus. This immune activation further leads to damage of our own body organs. To counteract this auto damage, patient goes in protected immunosuppressed state that is known as a counterbalancing immunosuppression state, which leads to persistent immunosuppression and leading to inflammation, immunosuppression, and catabolic state, which may lead to secondary bacterial infection and sometimes lead to death of the patient. This is the major cause of disability in post-COVID patients. If we see in post-COVID patient, we have multitude of symptoms ranging from fatigue, decline in quality of the life, muscular weakness, joint pain, dyspnea, cough, depression, anxiety, the sleep disturbances, cognitive impairment, that is also known as brain fog, palpitation, chest pain, or symptoms related to multiple organs. So we should also keep in mind about these symptoms in the patient who recovers after COVID-19. So this was about post-COVID syndrome. So in today's talk, we have take-home message is that nervous tissue involvement is one of the most devastating complications of COVID-19. It is associated with higher morbidity and mortality. Pathogenesis is either direct infection of nervous tissue or immunological mechanism. Behavioral disturbances, psychosis, and altered sensorium is the most common CNS manifestations. GBS is most important peripheral nervous system manifestation. Old age, high viral load, multiple comorbidities, and cytokine storm is the most common risk factor for neurological involvement. Post-COVID syndrome is going to overwhelm our healthcare system, seeing surge of the large number of recovered patients. So we should prepare for a multidisciplinary team for management of these patients. So early recognition and timely treatment is key to successful outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arvind Kankane, for such a nice talk. And I will just like to add on, since it is a neuropsychiatric talk. So few of the patients and many of us even, we had phantosmia-like symptoms.
Yes.
That is unpleasant odor, something like roasted toast or something smelling. So this is what we felt. And many of the patients, they also complained that some unusual smell they are feeling,
So
as if the body is burnt or something is there.
Definitely, sir, these are minor symptoms of COVID-19. This is because of infection of nasal epithelium, maybe because of affection of the end organ nerves in the nasal mucosa, or it is just a mucosal inflammation.
Many of the doctors of us, they complain like that they are feeling unusual smell.
This common manifestation.
Since we were wondering in
Almost,
the wards, yeah,
almost 70 to 80% notice this symptom. So this is very common symptom.
Thank you.
Arvind, very nice talk. What is the Institute of Suicide? Actually, one of our patients committed suicide, another tried to commit suicide, isn't it? Do you remember that?
Sir,
and second question is, how does this COVID Guillain-Barré syndrome differ from other Guillain-Barré syndrome as far as treatment is concerned?
Okay, sir. For first question, incidence of suicide in different report, it is around less than 1%. It may be because of direct effect of COVID-19 on the brain, or it is because of external environmental effect of loneliness, isolation, quarantine. So it is around 1%, around 1%. It is not that much common, but behavioral disturbance we get in lot of patients, almost 30 to 40% patients, we get behavioral disturbances in some form. And second question is about GBS, AIDP. So presentation of GBS is almost same as GBS by other causes like post-infectious polyneuropathy or Campylobacter jejuni associated GBS. Clinical presentation is almost same. And treatment is also almost same. IVIG is given both of these diseases, whether it is COVID-19 associated or it is other viral disease associated.
Very good talk, Dr. Arvind. I just like to know that when you're discharging the patient from the COVID-19, so to overcome the sleep disturbance or anxiety or depression, do you prescribe some mood elevators or some other things?
Definitely. This is post-COVID syndrome. I've just discussed that lot of almost 60 to 70% of discharged patients have at least one or two organ involvement, like lack of sleep, difficulty in concentration, anxiety, depression, or some neuromuscular disturbances, neuropathies, at least few of symptoms that last for almost 3 to 6 months. So we need to treat them on symptomatic basis.
Is there any role of melatonin? Some physicians are
Yes,
prescribing spray.
in sleep disturbances, it regulates the sleep-wake cycle. Melatonin is useful, but not in short-term sleeplessness. We have to give it a long time for its effect.
So spray is better or oral tablet is better? Melatonin.
Spray, I think, is better pharmacologically because it directly absorbs through the nasal mucosa
And less side effect, I think.
and less side effect also.
Okay, thank you.
Arvind boss, we have seen psychological effect over patient as well as consultant who are treating these patients. What is your
Yes.
what is your advice for these consultants or
So that is, I think, my most important advice to keep positive attitude. The day will come, then we will free of all this COVID. The positive attitude, I think, most important. I mentioned in psychological disturbance in healthcare workers. This is burned out, negative thoughts. This all are seen in healthcare workers. So just a positive thought of having free from this COVID-19 future can only console us.
चारों तरफ घूम रहे हैं तो हम क्या करें जरा कुत्ता भी भौंकता है तो उसको डर जाता है वो
Sir, fear psychosis. Fear psychosis, delusion, hallucinations, yes, sir. So, sir, that definitely require antipsychotics. Maybe atypical antipsychotics would work, like QTPin or olanzapine. So they would work. This is definitely psychosis, that patient is having hallucinations that someone is going to kill him, or dog, he's seeing dog. So it is found in post-COVID syndrome, these psychological disturbances.
I got 3 questions for you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
The first question is, somebody, as he rightly pointed out, they just tried to commit suicide from the medical corps.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you were mentioning about some syndrome, whatever it may be, but we needed a solution for that. I know that every brain works differently, every body reacts differently, but what is the solution? That's the first point. Second point, there is a tendency of people to hide their disease. This is a normal human tendency, that if you go to a doctor, it all depends upon the myth that is prevailing in their mind. इस डॉक्टर के पास जाइए अच्छा हो जाएगा, इस डॉक्टर के पास जाइए अच्छा नहीं हो पाएगा. They make their own perceptions. Okay, maybe because of the existing environment which they were brought up. इस डॉक्टर के पास जाइए आपको बेटा ही पैदा होगा, इस डॉक्टर के पास जाइए आपको बेटा पैदा होने की संभावना है. There are some kind of normal perceptions that the society go through. In the matter of COVID, we just have one thing to say, that the fear psychosis, how can we contain the fear psychosis? I gave a practical example of my own school teacher. She was non-COVID, she was a loner, and she died all of a sudden late night because she doesn't have anyone to take care of her. It
Yes,
is not a story of this place, but it's a story of Andhra Pradesh. That the fear psychosis factor, how to contain about it. Okay, IEC may be an information campaign, may be one aspect where you can get rid of all these things, but that the fear psychosis,
Yes,
how can
sir.
you get rid of it? I need a solution. और वो उसके जो संबंधित है, but because if you have something called migraine, normally people take some kind of medicine so that it can induce the sleep,
Yes, sir.
and that's how the pain receptors
Yes, sir.
will deviate your attention or deviate the neurological attention not to induce the pain into your head.
Yes, sir.
ये फियर साइकोसिस को कैसे हम लोग खत्म कर सकते हैं,
Sir,
स्पेशली इन द कोविड पेशेंट्स ओनली।
yes, sir.
और तीसरी पॉइंट, हम लोग अपना फोकस तो न्यूरोलॉजिकल एस्पेक्ट पे तो फोकस कर रहे हैं, बट साइकियाट्रिक एस्पेक्ट पे तो फोकस नहीं कर पा रहे।
Yes, sir.
वी नीड अ सेपरेट काउंसलिंग सेशंस फॉर दैट। इस संबंध में सारे डॉक्टर्स को, सारे प्राइवेट हॉस्पिटल्स को ये करना बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि यहाँ पे कुछ हमारे साथी लोग हैं, उनकी ट्रीटमेंट से ज्यादा उनकी वेंटिलेटर की एडवांस बुकिंग में तो अपना ज्यादा जोर लगा दिया था। ओके, और उनकी थेरेपी से ज्यादा रेमडेसिविर पे ज्यादा जोर लगा दिया था। आधे लोग तो इसी डर से बहुत परेशान किया सभी को कि रेमडेसिविर मिलेगा नहीं मिलेगा। ऑल सेड एंड डन, आफ्टर
Definitely, sir.
what the stature that had been given to remdesivir, you know better and we know better. What the stature that had been given to plasma therapy, we all know better. But during that course of peak or the COVID peak, remdesivir was a menace to us. And second thing, ventilator advance booking was also a menace to us, because people doesn't know what is the difference between a ventilator and a BiPAP. ये जो perceptions जो बन रही ना, how to get that perceptual change.
Sir,
Because majority of the hospitals who were here within this auditorium, majority of them had prescribed for this injection because they went for a common therapy. Just like a flu therapy, by common cold है, आपको azithromycin ले लीजिए, या नहीं तो कुछ और paracetamol ले लीजिए, some general medicine that we prescribe. So people went for a remdesivir all of a sudden. जो fear psychosis है, या ये जो therapy के संबंध में जो भी perceptual changes लाना है,
yes, sir.
last but not least, we should focus more upon the psychiatric aspect.
Definitely, sir.
So I just need 3 solutions for
Sir, regarding suicidal tendency, I would say the most important thing is counseling. You should have positive attitude. We should counsel the patient almost daily or multiple times a day. We should feel the positive thinking in him that he is going to be all right. He should be stay connected to his family members by either of the audiovisual aid or whatever is the mean. He should stay connected and he should have positive thought.
He should have positive thought, and especially the paramedics working under your control
Definitely, sir.
should induce the positive thought instead
Definitely, sir.
of loitering in the chambers.
Definitely, sir.
वो एक critical gap है इस पूरी therapy में हमने जो महसूस किया था,
Definitely, sir.
that the humane element of counseling is missing in the hospital.
So counseling is most important. These
No,
patients.
no. Counseling is missing.
Yes, that's missing, sir.
Counseling is the important aspect, but it is the duty of paramedics. Okay, that we should be focused upon paramedics for the psychiatric aspects.
Definitely, sir.
वरना ये वीडियो बनाना, ये खिड़की से खोदना, ये सब ऐसे चलता रहता है.
Sir, definitely, sir. It required a lot of counseling. And
Right. The next session will be for them only.
this, sir.
As I've been advocating right from day one, that you are focusing more upon doctors, focusing less upon the paramedics, which can do a lot of sweeping change.
Definitely, sir. Second, sir, you asked about fear psychosis. So this is a general perception. This is a you asked about कि ये doctor अच्छा है, वो doctor अच्छा है. This is probably a mass delusion. This is the thought insertion inside the brain of person. So this is a psychiatric aspect that कि हमने कह दिया sir ये अच्छा है. If someone is believing on me, so this is a thought insertion. So that also require counseling. That all are same. The therapy is same. You go anywhere, you will get same treatment. And sir, third thing sir आपका इसके counseling sir, उसका भी sir counseling. The answer is counseling. Sir, I think all is. Sir, I have taken more of neurological point of view. I have already taken some part of psychiatric overview, because.
So we do have the necessity of a psychiatrist, and especially the role of psychiatrist vis-a-vis paramedics. We will plan a session for that.
Definitely, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. So first of all, I like to
thank respected DM sir to allow me to interact in this interactive session for management of COVID-19 patients. And I would also thank Sanger sir for being a very important part of all these discussions. And we, on behalf of the entire doctors fraternity, would like to welcome our SSP sir, who has newly joined in this district. And the topic, after Dr. Arvind Kankane's elaborate discussion on the neuropsychiatric issues relating to COVID-19, is the urology in the COVID era and how do we transmit to the new normal. As we all know that this COVID pandemic has led us to change the style of medical, surgical, specialist, super specialist practices. And we have already, in some way or the other, adapted to the new normal. And that adaptation caused delay either in the diagnosis, investigation, and management. And ultimately, whenever the peak of this pandemic, it came down, and we were on the so-called recovery of COVID patients, we used to furnish the task of the fulfillment of the backlogs. Now, the challenge is to understand the pros and cons of the different approaches to prioritization, because in some areas we had a prioritization protocol, and then that prioritization led to delay somewhere else, and that had its own consequences. We have seen that the first COVID-19 wave, it resulted in an enormous increase in surgical waiting list, and that barely have been addressed before the second wave arrived. And so there is a lot of backlog as well as the surgical cases and even some procedural medical cases, they are pending. One impact which Sanger sir would agree as a head of the institution of medical college, that the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced the residency training program to a large extent. The residents, they were redeployed for care of the COVID patients, even if they were from the surgical specialty or they were from the other specialties, they were given the task of caring for the COVID patients. And the teaching activities, they shifted on an online platform. There was no grand round, there was no ward round, there was no clinical teaching, there was no journal clubs. And that has actually made a stressful impact on the residents as well as the undergraduate students. Introduction has already been covered nicely in the last many lectures. It's an infectious disease. The pandemic began in March 2020, and in different countries, at different occasions, there are early peak, post-peak plateau. Human-to-human transmission is confirmed now, and the main spread is respiratory, although we cannot deny that feces and fomites also have a role to play. Now, what is the foremost for any surgical practice, urology being a part of it, is the stepping down approach. Now, with the massive impact on the healthcare systems, we need a proper plan to face the anticipated rise in the demand from the healthcare, and thus the need to reduce the level of activity in all surgical specialties, including urology. Now, the stepping down approach is necessary to follow the infection control guidance to minimize the number of patients physically present at one point of time in one hospital, and to increase the bed allowance for any increase in the or a sharp rise in the number of COVID patients which occur as in wave, and then to free all possible equipments and healthcare workers for that to combat that particular sharp rise in the patients. Now, in the face of the pandemic, diminishing resources of healthcare, which has been very nicely fought here in Jhansi in the last few months, and then the second wave by the extra efforts by the district authorities led by DM sir and all the doctors and the paramedics, they have proved that the crucial need required a pragmatic approach, and that approach also wanted a change in the surgical practices. The British Urology Association led to development of a prioritization schema so that what has to be prioritized and what has to be taken next on the list, so that that plan would be very wise, so that nothing will be missed and nothing will be delayed actually. We know about the production level. It has also been nicely discussed in the past few lectures, but a word about the patients who are actually COVID positive. They are high risk because of aerosol generating procedures, intubation being one of them, ventilatory use, HFNO. And in the surgical arena, if you know that laparoscopy leads to a lot of CO2 aerosol generation. And similarly, the use of electrosurgical units, it can cause a lot of fumes or plumes in the environment, and that has to be taken care of. Now, for that, the surgeon should wear either a respirator of a grade of FFP3 or a ventilated hood to protect himself. Now, for outpatient department patients, all clinics, if they are clinic alone, not hospitals, they should be converted into virtual or telephone clinics. And all the, this is the simplest form of telemedicine. And in the main hospital, at least one room should be dedicated to make a clean urology room or a clean surgery room, where at least a face-to-face interaction with the patient, which is sometimes very much desirable, can be carried out. And if it is a urology, hospital, dedicated hospital, that clean room itself should be equipped with a catheter stock and a flexible cystoscopy stack system. Now, what is telemedicine? According to WHO, telemedicine is delivery of healthcare services by using information and communication technologies for the exchange of information for diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of disease. And we all have practiced it for the last 1.5 years. Mostly, the patients who have common ailments, they can be tackled with the help of telemedicine. And telemedicine was initially used in warfare situation. COVID is also like a war. And here, the prevention of communication of infectious diseases like COVID can be prevented with the help of telemedicine. Now, what to do with the inpatients? All the inpatients should be treated with a very high index of suspicion. For urology patients, we all know whenever a urology problem is of a moderate to severe grade, then urosepsis is accompanied. And whenever urosepsis is accompanied, we know that there will be fever. And for around more than 40% of the patients in COVID viral affliction, you have fever. So these patients who have fever and come with a urologic problem, they have to be believed that this infection can be because of COVID rather than because of urosepsis alone. So besides those general tests which we apply like serum ferritin, which will actually be pointer, we'll be waiting for the rapid antigen and the RT-PCR. Procalcitonin is a very important test which should be applied to actually label it as bacterial sepsis, urosepsis rather than COVID-19 infection alone. Now again, the European Association of Urology, they have given guidelines for 4 priority levels. And now these priority levels, they hold true for all surgical practices, including urology. The low priority patients, there if the surgery or the procedure as a cure is deferred, there will be no clinical harm even if the procedure or surgery is delayed for more than 6 months. Intermediate priority, clinical harm is possible, but it is highly unlikely if the procedure is postponed for around 3 months. High priority, when the clinical harm is very likely if the procedure is postponed for over 6 weeks. So only high priority cases during the peak of COVID or what you call as the real wave of COVID is there are to be dealt with. And for emergency procedures, they are to be dealt with in all cases, and the emergency dedicated ORs, they are present in the medical college, and sometimes in big hospitals, you have separate emergency OTs, which will never be shut down. And these are for life-threatening situations, they cannot be postponed. Now, how do we sort out the priorities? Again, going back to the basic thing, if it's a low acuity surgery, which can be easily postponed, it should be postponed. Like, for example, is a hydrocele. Intermediate acuity surgery, which is not life-threatening, but potential for future morbidity and mortality requires in-hospital stay, we can consider postponing when the pandemic is really on. And for example, a low-risk urologic cancer, maybe a bladder cancer, maybe a kidney cancer, or even a prostatic cancer, which is very slow to grow. In a high acuity surgery, we cannot postpone. Example is organ threatening, like a testicular torsion, or Most of the cancers which are of severe grade, which are very fast in multiplication, we cannot wait for 6 weeks or even 3 months, where that delay would cause catastrophic results, and very highly symptomatic patients like urolithiasis patients or even those patients who have very distressing symptoms. For the operation theaters, we know that we make a list of cases which are to be kept on the OT list. And we know that there are cases which are high priority cases, which cannot be cancelled by any means. There are emergency cases which are separately booked for the emergency OTs. And there are cases which can be postponed, and they can be postponed either for weeks or they can be postponed for months. Now, the cases which can be postponed are the first to be cancelled in the wave of an pandemic. And they are surgeries like varicocele, hydrocele, which we call as daycare surgery, nephrectomy for benign renal conditions like a small atrophic kidney or a kidney which is a potential for hypertension, andrologic procedures, functional reconstructive surgery, percutaneous nephrolithotomy for stones, definitely it can wait. Transurethral surgery for prostate, definitely it can wait. Now, second on the list is cancellation of diseases which can be pushed at least for 6 weeks. Now, cystectomy for a low-risk bladder tumor, our transurethral bladder tumor resection, again low risk, radical prostatectomy. We are all aware right from the MBBS days that carcinoma prostate is usually slow to grow. So pushing it for 6 weeks with active surveillance on a video or otherwise a consultation can easily be done. Nephrectomy with a low risk urothelial cancer, again, it can be postponed for a few weeks. Now, last to be cancelled is cystectomy for a high-grade, high-stage bladder tumor. TURBT, again, for cases where there are solid bladder tumors or the bladder tumor is bleeding. Radical nephrectomy for a tumor which is more than 7 centimeters in size or the stage is T2 or above. Nephrectomy in cases where there is a high risk of upstaging. And an inguinal orchidectomy for a testicular tumor which would disseminate if left alone for a few weeks. Ureteroscopy with a ureteric stone with a tube in situ, a ureteric stent or a percutaneous tube above in situ, which would lead to chances of bacteremia, septicemia, and even death if the cases are postponed. So that requires a special attention out of the urolithiasis. Now, there are certain emergency cases like testicular torsion, where the impediment to the blood supply would not give us enough time more than few hours. So it should be either it should be derotated or it should be fixed, whatever is that. So it's an emergency case. An obstructed infected kidney and abscess in the epididymis or the testis, a gangrene of the nature of Fournier's gangrene, a refractory priapism. If initial maneuvers done for relief of that priapism does not actually relieve it, then naturally a shunting procedure becomes an emergency. So this is basically a triage schema for the operation theaters, what cases cannot be postponed among the variety of urologic problems which actually the urologists and general surgeons they encounter. Now, what are the recommendations for surgery during COVID-19 pandemic? And these are actually not specific for urology alone. They are in general, and they should be discussed here, that the consent covering the risk of COVID exposure and consequences should be obtained. That even the patient, if he has or she has undergone the testing for COVID and they turn out to be negative and they are undergoing surgery during the pandemic, the consent for the transmission of the virus, it should always be there. Infection with the virus should be sought in any patient requiring surgery by test history testing, preferably a recent chest imaging also. Even if the patient says that I have got an X-ray done around a week back or 15 days back, a recent chest X-ray is mandatory. In a case of COVID-19 test positivity, the procedure should be postponed unless it is extremely urgent. So we have already discussed what is urgent. When surgery is performed in the patient with known or suspected COVID-19 infection, procedure should be performed in a dedicated OR, complying with the hospital recommendation for OR staff protection. Intubation and extubation should take place in a negative pressure room. And these negative pressure rooms, as Dr. Anshul pointed the other day, they are like ante rooms to the main operation theater, and there intubation is to be done, and then the patient shifted to the main OR, and then when extubation is to be done, these patients, they are brought back to the this room of low pressure, negative pressure, and then the patient is extubated. In the presence of negative COVID-19 PCR test, all recommendations to mitigate the COVID transmission should be diligently followed. Now, word about the electrosurgical units, they should be set at the lowest possible settings. And we should have preferably a fume evacuation device, or all we can do is we do a suction, and the exit of the suction should be through a HEPA filter, or it should be through a ULPA filter, so that the fumes, if the possibility of any virus is there, it can be eradicated. There are precautions specific to laparoscopic and robotic surgery need to be fulfilled. We don't have robotic here, but the laparoscopic surgery, there is no evidence to indicate that the virus is present in the CO2 aerosol. However, erring on the side of safety, we would warrant treating the virus as exhibiting infectious aerosolization. An effort should be made to limit the cautery plume creation and uncontrolled CO2 release into the UR. Insufflation pressure should be kept to minimum. We are very happy to keep it at around 10 or 11 rather than 12 and 14 during laparoscopic procedures. And then once we adapt to it, the visibility is no problem and the operation goes on very well. And laparoscopic suction devices should ideally be connected to a filtered device that I've already mentioned. Prior to specimen extraction, closure, trocar removal, and conversion to open, all new peritoneum should be safely evacuated via filtration system. That is very much necessary. Now, for the most common problems which we have in this region is urolithiasis. Now, specifically, not all urolithiasis, they are emergencies for the urology problems or ailments. A non-obstructing renal calculus, here the word is renal, with a normal renal function, and if it happens to be a non-solitary kidney, the approach is never urgent, it can be easily delayed. Now here, the problem will be whether they have symptoms or they don't have symptoms. Going on the right side of the spectrum, a non-obstructing renal calculus with a chronically impaired renal function and a solitary kidney, they would definitely gain ahead of the patients on the left side. A word about ureteric renal stones with the indwelling tube. Suppose the patient underwent a PCN or a DJ stenting for a renal or a ureteric calculus in the pre-COVID days and is harboring that tube inside the body and has now come for treatment because of increase in urosepsis or increase in the symptomatology, then these patients are to be given priority. Although they are non-obstructed, they are only of a small size, but still they will require priority because the chances of urosepsis getting increased in due course of time is always there. Obstructing ureteral or renal calculus, even with a normal functioning kidney, no solitary kidney, no fever, no systemic infection, requires priority. And out of this, the obstructing ureteric renal calculus with a solitary kidney or a solitary functioning kidney, acute impaired renal function, bilateral obstruction, unmanageable symptoms, they should be given the highest of priority. They should not be delayed. And an infected ureteric or renal stone, they also should be given priority. So out of this, if we see on the right side, the obstructing ureteral renal stone with compromised renal function or a solitary kidney or an infected kidney, they all should be dealt with as on a priority basis, and they cannot be postponed. Now, we know that prostatic carcinoma is a slow-growing carcinoma, but still the patients, and there has been a recent correlation which has been seen by the American Urology Association, that the patients who are known cases of carcinoma prostate, because of the androgen ablation or androgen deprivation therapy, which has been given to them on prolonged basis, they are around twofold more susceptible to COVID-19 infections. And these patients, although the pace of managing them has to be slow, but they cannot be ignored at any time. It depends upon the PSA, and if the PSA is greater than 20, then these patients, at least they can be kept on. You can get the PSA report on telephone, you can get it on the imaging media, whatever you have. You can start them on hormonal therapy. You can order a bone scan if possible. Now, if it is a low or intermediate risk non-metastatic cancer, the PSA monitoring instead of 3 months can be postponed for 6 months, and biocalotide 50 mg is sufficient. If it's a high risk non-metastatic cancer, then a LHRH agonist instead of a bilateral orchidectomy, which is the standard of care, can be given. In a metastatic prostate cancer, LHRH agonist still to be given, but chemotherapy is not to be given because it will make, because of its immunosuppressive nature, make the patient more susceptible to COVID-19 infections. About bladder tumors, a non-visible hematuria in a past 60 years male will require no attention in a decreased service or a severely decreased service of COVID-19 era. But those with visible hematuria over 45 years, they should actually get some attention, and the workup with the help of ultrasound or other modalities should be done. Now, what to do with the TURBT list of patients? Now, for a new bladder tumor, we are supposed to restrict it to solid bladder tumors to fulfill the diagnosis of muscle invasion, and those who are actively bleeding for hemostasis, it has to be done. But for re-resection of tumors, we will restrict it to a high-risk non-muscle invasive tumor only. If the very peak is there, as we had here in Jhansi around 1.5 months back, then we can stop TURBT altogether. We can put the patient on a tri-way catheter, give him hemosaptics and other things, which will take care. The follow-up protocol, which is a standard of care for transitional cell carcinoma of the bladder, is 3 monthly for the first year, then 6 monthly, then yearly cystoscopies. Here, it will be prolonged. On low risk, it will go to once in a year cystoscopy. In intermediate risk, it will go to 6 months. And for those which have high risk, it will go only, for that we'll contain for 3 months. Muscle invasive bladder cancers, we'll prefer radiotherapy instead of radical cystectomy. And if radiotherapy is contraindicated, that radical cystectomy also can be delayed for more than 3 months. Regarding management of renal tumors, if they are incidentally diagnosed or they are only complex cysts, imaging follow-up can be done at an interval of 6 to 9 months. And if they are complex masses between 4 centimeters to 7 centimeters, the imaging has to be done within 3 to 6 months. For T1A and B, which is again less than 7 centimeters size tumor, surveillance alone with the help of imaging is a good way to postpone the actual conduct of surgery, which can be done in the post-peak era. In tumors which are more than 7 centimeters, surgery has to be done. In tumors which are more than 10 centimeters, a high priority surgery has to be done. In metastatic RCCs, as the older thought was, there is no need to do a cytoreductive surgery or biopsy, even in the presence of a large tumor, and the patient can be referred to the oncologist, but they can always be given tyrosine kinase inhibitors, which have no detrimental effect during the COVID-19 infections. About testicular tumors, whether they have been diagnosed on the basis of tumor markers or they have been diagnosed on the basis of the ultrasonography, these patients ultimately have to undergo inguinal orchidectomy. That orchidectomy can wait for the peak to cross. Otherwise, the standard of care in this cancer is that the surgery has to be done. Adjuvant therapy, all these patients, they have to be, whether seminomatous or non-seminomatous, they have to be kept on active surveillance. Chemotherapy will only be given whether it is carboplatin here in seminomas or the BEP regimen in the non-seminomas, but all these have to be given with the consent form of isolation to the patient because it can be counterproductive in otherwise cases. There is no role of testicular prosthesis once these patients are diagnosed in the COVID era. So as a gist, in the post-operative cases, which will hold true for all surgical specialties, the hospital stay should be minimum, routine PPE, no shortcutting, avoid prolonged rest because surgery as well as COVID both are hypercoagulable states. We have already learned that. And prophylactic low molecular weight heparin has to be given. And this can be given for a very long period if the patient can manage that. Otherwise, for 10 days, low molecular weight heparin followed by oral anticoagulant as the patient's D-dimer and other things they will guide. Post-discharge, the patient can very well attend you on the video call, and he should be advised not to do a prolonged rest, maintain social distancing at home also. That is a word of advice in the COVID era to non-COVID patients both. And as we have discussed in the last lecture, multidisciplinary approach, including the psychosocial support, which is a very important angle. And that psychosocial support can be provided by counselors, they can be provided by paramedics, but first of all by the treating doctor himself. What will be the future? The future will be that we recommend all the elective procedures in the post-COVID peak, psychological supports to the involved health workers also. The burden of the backlogged cases, it is said that just after the peak, even if you increase the surgery pace by 20%, it will take at least 2 to 3 months to clear the backlog. And that is what must have been seen in the district hospitals and the medical colleges OT list. And the long-term changes in the surgical practice are required. Teleconsultation, if the ethics and the feasibility allow, it will change the style of our working in future. Smoke management devices, they would be a common feature in the OT room equipments. We have some case scenarios also, but if people are interested, they can ask their separate questions. And let me tell you that information is not knowledge. The only source of knowledge is experience. And what we learned from yesterday, we live it today, and we hope for tomorrow. And the most important thing is not to stop questioning. So I request the Honorable August gathering to please questions if they have any. Thank you. If there are no questions, I will like to request Sanger sir to please comment on the increasing AKIs which have been faced. We have all been talking about the pulmonary part of the COVID, but a very serious complication which most of the patients they had in either a small segment or in a big segment was the acute kidney injury. They had episodes of tubular necrosis with hematuria. They had a sudden deterioration of function. Although those patients who were established CKD, which were having the full protocol of medicines, they actually did not deteriorate. Maybe the reasons are separate, but they were well protected and they continued their services of hemodialysis or continuous renal replacement therapy.
Manish, you have very nicely presented the surgical scenario and COVID and how to go ahead and how to stop, where to stop, where to go. So regarding acute kidney injury and regarding renal failure, basically everybody knows that renal failure two types, basically acute kidney injury which is recoverable and a chronic kidney disease which is not recoverable. And fortunately, our medical college has got 2 dialysis units. Number one for non-COVID, it works through all the time. And COVID department, we have 10 machines. So no patient was left without dialysis. Everybody got it. That's why our CKD patients did not have very high mortality because of good dialysis support system. Regarding kidney injury, acute kidney injury, as you know, in ICU setting, the multiple factors are involved in acute kidney injury, hypertension, sepsis, drugs. Regarding one important point regarding amphotericin B is a nephrotoxic. Amphotericin B causes hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, acute tubular necrosis, especially calcium deposition, thick ascending limb, and distal converted tubule. So obviously when the kidney and renal tubular cirrhosis also because of amphotericin B. So, but and this is not very, very much nephrotoxic at there is public opinion. So, if there is a renal injury, I have seen few patients who are given amphotericin B and developed acute kidney injury, all after stopping amphotericin B, and the patients are recovering very well. So, acute kidney injury, it's if treated well within time, causative factors are taken care, then the good prognosis, and you have good dialysis support system, especially SLAD and CRRT, so patient can be managed. So this is a multi systemic involvement in COVID. So every organ involved. So the kidney is also. Uh, that's about regarding acute kidney injury. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
लाइव डीएक्टिवेट कर दो।